2024 Upper Yellowstone Channel Migration Map Tutorial, Part 1, Channel Migration 101. This is the first of a two-part video tutorial on the 2024 Upper Yellowstone River Channel Migration Map. This presentation is being given by Montana Freshwater Partners, a nonprofit organization based in Livingston, Montana. You can learn more about us at freshwaterpartners.org. First, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the DNRC grant that paid for the development of the 2024 Channel Migration Map, the consultants who created the map, and a special thanks to the Montana Trout Foundation for supporting the production of this video tutorial. So this is the first video in a two-part series. In this first video tutorial, we are going to cover channel migration concepts, what it is, why it's important. We're also going to go over the risks of building in the channel migration zone and what you can do to minimize those risks and minimize your impacts to the river. Lastly, we'll introduce the channel migration map and close out with some additional sources of information about living and working along the Yellowstone River. In the second video tutorial, we're going to dive into the channel migration map, where I'll explain the key map features and how you can access the maps, reports, and GIS data online. I'll also give you a tour of the online interactive web mapper so you can learn how to zoom into your area of interest, explore historic channel alignments, and print custom maps. So channel migration mapping concepts. This map defines a specific type of river hazard, and that's channel migration. Channel migration maps are non-regulatory in Montana. They're different from floodplain mapping. They're based on mapping and measuring from historical aerial imagery and based on well-established methodologies. These maps are super cost-effective to develop in your community, and they're used to help make informed decisions for property owners, realtors, engineers, developers, you name it. Anybody can use these maps, they can access these maps and use the information to help them make more informed decisions for their property. So what is channel migration? Channel migration is the natural movement of a channel across its floodplain over time. Here's a cartoon of the Yellowstone River showing the historic channel locations since 1948, which shows how the river has moved across its floodplain in the last 75 years. That area that the river has occupied over time is called the historic channel migration zone. So floodplain maps and channel migration maps are different from one another. Floodplain maps are regulatory, channel migration maps are not. Regulatory floodplain maps show the extent of surface water inundation from a 100-year or 1% annual flood event, and some flood maps will also show the extent of the inundation for a 500-year event or a 0.2% annual flood event. Floodplain maps essentially show you where you're going to get wet during a flood event. Building within regulated floodplain is controlled at the local, state, and federal level and requires various permits. Channel migration maps are not regulatory and show you where the river has been located in the past, where it is likely to move into the future, and what areas are most at risk of migration-related hazards. Channel migration affects properties that are located in flood hazard areas as well as areas that are not in flood hazard areas. Together, these maps provide property owners with a more complete understanding of the flood and erosion risks associated with their property. So what are those risks? The biggest risk factors associated with channel migration are erosion and channel avulsion, which is when a river quickly changes its channel alignment, like cutting a new side channel. Building within the channel migration zone places those structures at risk of having their foundations undermined, especially during big flood events. Now, it's important to understand that channel migration is always going to happen. It's to some degree because gravity is moving water through a river bottom. There's always going to be some erosion and deposition of sediment occurring along the river. But during flood events, these processes can speed up dramatically, and that's when we see the biggest, most damaging shifts that can cause impacts to homes and other structures in the migration zone. In 2022, we had a major flood event on the Yellowstone River. The photos on the right illustrate the effects of flooding, and this is what would be captured on a floodplain map, for example. The photos on the left show the impacts of channel migration on structures that were located in the channel migration zone during that flood. We saw severe erosion and even total structural failures in places that weren't located in the regulated floodplain, but were still within the channel migration zone. So this is why it's so important to consider both floodplain maps and channel migration maps. They give property owners, engineers, realtors, and decision makers a better picture of the development risks along our active rivers. So we know channel migration can be a hazard, but it's also essential for keeping rivers healthy. Rivers like the Yellowstone are living dynamic systems that constantly change and renew themselves. Flooding and channel migration drive that renewal. They sustain everything from the cottonwood galleries and willow stands to the wildlife and even the livelihoods that rely on the healthy and functioning river. But when a river is boxed in with too much bank armoring, like dikes, levees, or rock riprap, or when the river can't reach its floodplain during floods, natural system can start to break down. And over time, the river loses both health and resilience. So why does channel migration matter for river health? As the river shifts, it scours, erodes, and deposits sediment. And that's what forms open gravel bars where floodwaters can spread out and drop seeds that grow into new cottonwood and willow saplings. It's the natural way riparian vegetation is renewed. As older trees die, younger ones that are already established on these fresh surfaces grow in to replace them, which you can see in these photos that show varying heights of ages of plants along the banks. Vegetation stabilizes banks, provides shading for the river, provides food and nutrients and for wildlife and aquatic species, and riparian vegetation along the Yellowstone and other rivers in Montana have evolved with regular floods and channel movement. Riparian vegetation actually depends on that disturbance to regenerate. When we block these natural processes from happening, we limit the river's ability to sustain and renew its floodplain vegetation. Channel migration is also really critical for in-stream habitat. Erosion facilitates gravel recruitment, which brings in fresh gravels to the riverbed, which the river then sorts and scours, creating areas for trout to spawn and deep holes that provide refuge areas for fish during hot summer months. Channel migration is also critical for large woody debris recruitment, which is when the bank erosion causes large trees like cottonwoods to fall into the river. And this woody debris can rack up against bank lines or islands, creating fantastic natural bank protection and deep holes for fish habitat. When large wood is allowed to accumulate, it forms shelter for fish during high water, provides places for new plants to take root, traps sediment, and creates surfaces for insects and other wildlife that depend on the river habitat. So can we strike a balance? We have a lot of new development pressures along the river in Park County, but we also have a strong desire in our county to be good stewards of the river so it can continue to be this incredible natural resource. So thinking about that balance, it helps to think about how we manage or treat our rivers and the trade-offs, which often comes down to the individual landowner decision. The photo on the left shows a river being treated as a channel. A lot of rivers in the U.S. are managed as channels these days, where they've been confined down to a single channel by bank armor like riprap, levees, and dikes. This allows floodplains to be developed and maximizes the uses of land next to the river while also placing a lot more control and predictability on the river dynamics. But what happens when a river gets locked down like this and constricted is that there's nowhere for the water to go, especially during flood events. And when all of that energy gets confined to the river channel during a flood, it drives the velocity of the water up and increases the erosive forces acting on the banks. And ironically, this causes more damage to bank armor and the levee protections that were built to protect against this in the first place. When we lock a river in like this, we also shut down the dynamic processes that sustain riparian vegetation communities and in-stream habitat. And over time, we end up with a river that has faster, stronger flows, which requires bigger and more expensive protections, and we lose diversity in habitat. A good analogy to think about for this is when you use a garden hose to wash your car off in the driveway. What do you do when we need to blast some dirt off our car? We put our thumb over the end of the hose to constrict the area the water is moving through. And what happens? The water comes out faster and stronger, so you can blast that dirt off more easily. Every time we add a new segment of bank armor to the river, it's like we're closing our thumb over the end of the hose just a little bit more. On the Yellowstone in Park County, we've armored up another 8.5 miles of bank line over just the last 15 years. And we now have almost 32 miles of armored bank line in our county alone. Our county also has the highest concentration of dikes and levees along the entire length of the Yellowstone. So unfortunately, we are trending towards that channelized condition, and we're slowly putting our thumb over the end of the hose. The alternative to this is to keep our rivers open and treated like corridors. The photo on the right is a portion of the Gallatin River, and this is a great example of a river being left as a corridor, where it's been given space to flood and move. This not only keeps those critical dynamic processes like flooding and channel migration going, but it also gives floodwaters room to spread out during flood events. And when water can spread out, it slows down, and all of that energy that is associated with the moving water is allowed to dissipate, resulting in less damage from erosive forces. So before I introduce the channel migration map, I want to spend just a few more minutes on bank armoring because we're seeing more development and growth in these high hazard areas along the Yellowstone River. As the upper Yellowstone becomes more constrained with bank armoring like riprap, we know that we're going to start seeing a gradual decline of the health of the Yellowstone River because the river is slowly being cut off from its floodplain, and we're seeing the gradual decline of stream bank diversity and health. We're also seeing costs for property owners go up, either because they didn't realize they built along the channel migration zone and now they feel they have to armor the bank to protect their investments, or because their armored bank lines that they already put so much money into were damaged and need repairing because they're failing. In the next couple of slides, I'll show you a few examples of this and why it's important to consider where your property is located relative to the channel migration zone so you can avoid similar situations. So here's an example of riprap that is starting to fail on the upper Yellowstone. This is a property where the river has been migrating outward over the last 20 to 30 years and where the bank line was riprap to protect the house and slow down bank erosion. But since water will always find the pathway of least resistance, it's very common to see accelerated erosion occurring immediately upstream and downstream of a riprap bank line like this. This is called flanking and is the beginning of bank armor failure. This is not a good situation to be in as a homeowner. Not only is this an expensive repair that will continue to need repairs over time, but it will also cause issues, or it can cause issues with neighbors if that accelerated erosion is happening on their property. So this is the progression of that bank armor failure in a different location where the river has eroded the bank line behind the riprap. And if left unrepaired, this is what failed riprap looks like on another location on the river. Now, there are several situations where riprap or other forms of severe bank stabilization measures are required to protect critical infrastructure. But if you can leave with one nugget of information from this presentation, it's that riprap is not fail-proof, nor does it guarantee protection if you are in the channel migration zone. That said, if you have a bank line that is experiencing accelerated erosion, I would encourage you to talk with an experienced water resource engineer who has worked on the Yellowstone River to discuss bank restoration treatments that use materials that will replicate the natural healthy bank lines that you see in your area. This bioengineered approach will help restore natural bank line stability with a more normalized erosion rate while also supporting riparian and in-stream health. Okay, so let's shift gears and take a look at what the channel migration map looks like and how you can use it to make informed decisions on your property. So here's the channel migration map, and I'll go over these different features in more detail in part 2 of this video series, but here is a preview of what you can expect to see. So you'll see the current or most recent channel alignment in light blue. This is 2023. You're also going to see in dark blue, these are the areas that the channel has occupied in the past, labeled as the historic channel footprint. In orange, these are what were called erosion hazard areas. So this is a buffer and an indication of where the channel is migrating and these areas that are at higher risk of future erosion. We've identified all of the riprap, levees, dikes, and point barbs, different types of armoring along the river in these different symbols of yellow triangles and red circles. And so you can see where the armor exists today, and behind that armor we've identified a restricted migration zone, just recognizing that these areas can still erode, but that migration is restricted in these areas. In pink, we can see the avulsion hazard zones. So these are low-lying areas that are at risk of avulsion, which is that sudden shift or cutting of a new side channel. So different shifts, sudden shifts in channel alignment could occur in these low-lying areas. And then in the hatched areas, they're called geotechnical overlays. These are just indicators of steep vertical banks that will naturally want to lay back with erosion, where that erosion could be accelerated over time during flooding events. So again, we'll talk about more of this in part 2 of the video series. Whoops. But before we go there, I just want to let you know the different uses that we can use for this map. And so keep this in mind as you're watching the second video. This map can be used for property research. If you are a developer or somebody who is looking into buying new property, use this map to understand your risks. For folks who already own property along the river, you can use this map for a cost-benefit analysis or just a simple pros-cons list to think about if you have existing structures in the channel migration zone that you may want to move or that you're worried about. This map can be used for siting and design considerations for future homes, structures, subdivisions, public infrastructure, and utilities. And we also can use this map for restoration planning and design. So we can go back into time to see what the river looked like before it was impaired or impacted in a particular location, and see what that natural bank line looked like and try to replicate that or to reestablish some of these side channels that have been cut off, for example. So everything is online, available online to anybody. If you Google 2024 Yellowstone Channel Migration Map, just click on the Montana State Library link. This is where all of this information lives. You'll find a really great report that goes along with this map. You will find PDFs of all of the maps that reach from Gardner all the way down to Springdale in Park County along the river. You can print those maps off. You can actually download all of the GIS data that went into building this map. And there will also be an interactive web mapper of the Channel Migration Zone map online. And this is going to be a really great tool if you want to zoom into your property and explore the different layers a little bit more. You can take layers off and go back into time. You can add those layers back on and print custom maps. Couple other resources I want to share with you. The Montana Cadastral website. This is a really great state website that just provides all of the parcel information. So handy website to have open while you are looking at your channel migration map so you can hone into a particular parcel of interest. I would encourage folks to also take a look at the Yellowstone River Recovery Basics Story Map. Now this is on the Upper Yellowstone Watershed Group website. And this is a story map that Montana Freshwater Partners help contribute to, and it just goes over a lot of river basics. It talks about the permitting requirements of working on the river, bank treatments, best management practices, and long-term restoration strategies and goals. And then another website that's great if you really want to take a look at information about the 2022 Yellowstone flood. There is a 2022 flood data hub online, and this is also on the Montana State Library. And you can see images, videos, and various other data forms and database sources related to that big 2022 flood event. And lastly, just a few parting comments. If you are new to living along the river or you are looking to buy property along the river, it's really important to set reasonable expectations. This river is powerful, and erosion and movement is a natural process. It is far better to get out of nature's way and to work with nature than to fight nature. And I'm sure anybody that has lived along the river for a long time can tell you that battling the Yellowstone River can be a very, very expensive endeavor over time. If you are living along the river, have a property where you're experiencing accelerated bank erosion, consider bank stabilization treatments that replicate the natural bank line of the river in your area. So these are those bioengineered treatments that I mentioned, and these would use materials like boulders or rock cobble or gravel, large root wads from those big trees, brush mattresses, willow wattles, natural woody debris, or a combination of these materials to restore your bank line to a more natural condition. And one final word of advice, please follow local, state, and federal regulations if you're doing any projects along the river. With that, if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at info@freshwaterpartners.org, and be sure to check out part 2 of the video tutorial series, which goes into the channel migration map tutorial. Thank you very much.